I bought back my life for $5 million, but the only currency the collector accepted was my best man. The air in the penthouse was thick, scented with aged scotch, and the sterile cleanliness that only a fortune can buy. Outside, the city lights of Manhattan glittered like spilled diamonds, but inside the only illumination came from the harsh, clinical glare of the medical equipment surrounding my absurdly oversized Italian leather sofa. I was Robert Sterling, and I had everything, except time. "Just one more test, Mr. Sterling," Dr. Albright murmured, his voice tight with a professional sympathy that grated on my nerves. He was looking at the monitor, his brow furrowed into a roadmap of bad news. My own face, reflected dimly in the polished glass of the panoramic window, looked like a mask carved from granite, and pale and set in a permanent grimace. Terminal. The word hung in the air, a silent executioner waiting for the clock to strike midnight. Pancreatic cancer, aggressive stage 4. They'd given me 6 months, maybe less, after draining my insurance company dry on treatments that felt more like elaborate forms of torture than medicine. I leaned back, the sound of the electric wheelchair humming beneath me. A gift from my 5th ex-wife, ironically, because I couldn't walk more than 10 feet without oxygen tanks strapped to my back. "Doctor," I rasped, my voice barely a whisper past the phlegm that seemed determined to choke the life out of me daily. "Cut the theater. How much time?" Albright adjusted his tie, avoiding my gaze. "With aggressive palliative care, perhaps 3, maybe 4 months of quality time left, Mr. Sterling. We've exhausted conventional avenues. We've even looked into experimental gene therapies in Switzerland." "Stop," I commanded, lifting a trembling hand. The gesture felt monumental. "I don't want quality time. I want time. I want to see the next fiscal quarter. I want to fire Henderson for that disastrous acquisition. I want to live long enough to see my grandson graduate high school, not just his kindergarten play." I took a slow, shuddering breath, the oxygen mask momentarily fogging my vision. Then, the fire, the Sterling fire, the one that built an empire out of scrap metal and sheer audacity, flickered back into my eyes. I reached for the small, ornate mahogany box on the side table, my private safe, pulling out a single, pristine, white business card. It wasn't for a doctor, or a lawyer, or a broker. It was for a man named Elijah. "I'm offering $5 million, I announced, my voice surprisingly strong, echoing slightly in the cavernous space. Albright nearly dropped his clipboard. $5 million, cash, wired instantly to anyone who can provide a miracle. A genuine, verifiable reversal of this diagnosis. Not remission, not slowing it down. Gone. Eradicated. And I'm starting with this card. Elijah promised things. Strange things. He operates outside the system." Albright scoffed, a nervous, unprofessional sound. "Mr. Sterling, this is fantasy. We are dealing with biology, not magic." "Then I suppose I'll go bankrupt chasing fantasy," I sneered, dropping the card onto the polished glass surface of my desk. "Call the number, doctor. See what kind of charlatan answers. What do I have to lose? My life? That's already scheduled for termination." Albright hesitated for a long moment, his professional ethics battling the sheer, staggering lure of $5 million for a 5-minute phone call. Greed, as always, won. He snatched the card, his fingers surprisingly quick, and retreated to a far corner of the room, punching in the digits with palpable excitement mixed with dread. The next hour was silence, punctuated only by the sterile beeping of my life support drip. Albright looked increasingly awkward as the minutes stretched on. Finally he turned back, his face pale, his mouth slightly agape. "Mr. Sterling," someone answered, a very polite woman. She said Mr. Elijah would be here in precisely 20 minutes. She didn't ask about payment. She just said, "He understands the urgency." 20 minutes later, my security team, a quartet of former Navy SEALs who looked like statues carved from granite, milled nervously in the foyer. They were trained for armed assault, not for the soft tap that sounded at the reinforced steel door. I watched them via the internal monitor, waiting for the explosion, the breach, the chaos. Instead, the door hissed open, and my head of security, a man named Rex who had stared down actual warlords without blinking, simply stepped aside. And then I saw him. He was not what I expected. No flowing robes, no mystical aura, no ancient wisdom etched onto his face. He was just a boy. Maybe 12, possibly 13. He was impossibly small, dressed in an oversized, slightly muddy gray hoodie, and jeans that looked far too big for his frame. He wore bright, mismatched sneakers, and one of his laces was dragging on the Italian marble floor. His skin was the deepest, richest shade of brown I had ever seen, and his eyes were disconcertingly bright, like polished obsidian reflecting 1,000 distant stars. He stopped just inside the threshold, surveying the high-tech medical setup, the blinking monitors, the smell of disinfectant, and the sheer, overwhelming opulence of my prison. He didn't look scared or impressed. He looked curious, like a traveler examining a very expensive, very broken machine. My seals were frozen, their weapons lowered just enough to suggest they weren't currently attacking, but ready to react instantly. They looked ridiculous, dwarfed by the situation. The boy didn't even glance at them. He walked directly toward me, his steps light, almost floating over the floor. When he reached the edge of the Persian rug separating the main living area from my medical station, he paused and looked down at the dangling shoelace. He bent over, quickly tying a neat knot, and then stood up straight, looking directly into my dying eyes. "Mr. Sterling," he said. His voice was surprisingly deep for his size, clear, and perfectly unaccented. "You sounded desperate on the phone." I managed a weak, cynical smile, the movement painful. "Desperate enough to pay $5 million for a miracle kid. You look a little young to be an exorcist or a faith healer. Where's your management?" The boy tilted his head, a gesture of innocent contemplation. He walked the last few feet, stopping right beside my chair. I could smell something faint on him, not perfume, not sickness, but something clean, like rain on hot earth. "Oh, I am my own management," he replied softly. He reached out a small hand, his fingers startlingly slender, and placed it gently on my exposed forearm, right above the IV port. His skin felt strangely warm, almost feverish against my own clammy flesh. "You want to live, Robert Sterling?" he asked, his star-bright eyes locking onto mine, seeming to see past the cancer, past the money, right into the panicked, terrified core of me. "More than anything," I choked out, the desperation finally stripping away the last layer of my millionaire arrogance. He nodded once, a serious confirmation. Then he squeezed my arm, and the world dissolved. The pressure from the boy's hand wasn't violent, but it was absolute, like the grip of a hydraulic press disguised as a child's touch. The moment his skin met mine, a shock, sharp and searing. It didn't just travel up my arm, it radiated inward, a column of white-hot energy that bypassed my nervous system entirely. It wasn't pain, not exactly. It was revelation. Every cell in my body screamed, not in protest, but in sudden, violent recognition. I gasped, a deep rattling sound that sucked the stale, oxygenated air from my lungs. My vision tunneled. The sterile white walls of the penthouse seemed to ripple, the polished chrome fixtures vibrating as if struck by an invisible, immense bass note. Inside my chest, where the tumor had been a cold, deadening weight for months, there was sudden, explosive activity. It felt like 1,000,000 tiny hammers were simultaneously shattering glass, followed instantly by the warmth of liquid sunlight flooding the empty spaces. Dr. Albright, who had been frozen mid-reach for his phone, I let out a choked cry. The seals shifted, their discipline momentarily shattered by the sudden, visible aura that enveloped me. A faint, shimmering gold light pulsed beneath the boy's small hand, illuminating the thin skin of my forearm with an unearthly glow. I tried to speak, to ask what he was doing, but my mouth was dry, my throat useless. My eyes, however, were suddenly crystal clear. I could see the dust motes dancing in the air, conditioning current, the faint scratch marks on the base of Albright's expensive watch, the minuscule tremor in Rex's massive hand. It was hyperclarity, the world rendered in impossible high definition. Then, the internal sensation peaked. It was a feeling of being violently unburdened, the crushing weight in my abdomen, the source of all my misery, and the physical manifestation of my impending doom, simply vanished. It wasn't treated, it was deleted, as if a corrupted line of code had been excised from the master program. The light faded as quickly as it had appeared. The profound internal roaring ceased. The boy removed his hand. I blinked, deeply disoriented, and took an involuntary deep breath. A full, lung-expanding breath, the kind I hadn't managed without coughing in over a year. It didn't hurt. It didn't feel labored. It felt right. I tentatively flexed my fingers, then pushed my hands down onto the armrests of the chair. I tentatively curled my toes inside my silk slippers. No weakness, no nausea. The constant low-grade thrum of systemic poisoning that had been my background noise for half a year was utterly silent. What happened? I whispered, testing the sound of my own voice. It was rough, unused, but strong. The boy stepped back, dusting his hands lightly on his already dusty jeans. He looked utterly unimpressed by the miracle he had just performed. "You were broken, Mr. Sterling. Now you are fixed. Simple mechanics." Albright stumbled forward, abandoning all pretense of professionalism. He fumbled for the monitor, his hands shaking so violently he nearly unplugged the entire station. He jabbed at the screen, calling up the latest readouts from the internal diagnostics I'd been strapped into. His eyes scanned the data, darted back to me, then back to the screen again. "Impossible," he muttered, his voice thin and reedy. "The primary markers, they're gone, not reduced. Gone. The cell count is normalizing. The inflammation markers. Mr. Sterling? Your liver function is better than it was 5 years ago. This shouldn't be scientifically possible." He looked up at the boy, his face a mixture of terror and desperate awe. "Who are you?" The boy didn't answer Albright. He turned his attention back to me, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching the corner of his mouth. It was a smile that suggested he knew secrets that spanned millennia. "The $5 million, Mr. Sterling," he said. "It was a good offer. A very generous down payment for the effort." I gripped the armrests, feeling the return of my old predatory instinct. I was alive. I was strong. I could feel the engine of my life roaring back to full power. The money was irrelevant now. I had been given the ultimate commodity. "Consider it paid," I said, my voice gaining resonance with every word. I leaned forward, a CEO, ready to close the deal. "Kid, you just saved Robert Sterling. I want to know how you did that. I want to know what you are. I want you on retainer. You and whoever sent you. Name your price. Immortality. A seat on my board. Anything you want." The boy took a slow step backward, toward the open doorway where the bewildered SEALs stood guard. His bright eyes held a look of profound pity. "You misunderstand, Mr. Sterling," he said. "You paid for the miracle, but miracles always come with a cost." Before I could press him, before Albright could launch into a tirade of scientific outrage, before Rex could move to apprehend the strange visitor, the boy looked past me, directly at the floor-to-ceiling window displaying the glittering, uncaring city below. "You see all this, Robert?" he asked, gesturing vaguely toward the glass. The wealth, the power, the empire you clawed together? It's all very impressive for something that was supposed to be dead by Tuesday." He took another step back, his mismatched sneakers suddenly looking significant, planted on the threshold of my ordered, controlled world. "The miracle is done. But I need collateral for the repayment plan. You see, Robert, while I was fixing the broken parts in your body, something else needed a temporary vessel to anchor the exchange." He pointed a slender finger, not at me, but directly at the SEAL commander, Rex, who was still standing rigid, weapon lowered, eyes locked on the boy. "He's mine now," the boy stated simply, his tone shifting from soft negotiation to undeniable decree. "He's the collateral, Aki, and I need him to take me home." The silence that followed the boy's pronouncement was so absolute, I could hear the faint, high-pitched whine of the air filtration system cycling. For a moment, even my new, impossibly clear perception couldn't process the implication. He's mine now. Rex, the monolith of discipline, the man who had survived multiple hostile takeovers disguised as border skirmishes, stood utterly still. His eyes, usually hard and focused, seemed to glaze over, becoming as unsettlingly bright as the boy's had moments before. He wasn't blinking. He wasn't breathing. Not visibly, anyway. Rex! I barked, shoving myself upright in the chair, the sudden exertion feeling effortless. $5 million was a pittance compared to the life I'd reclaimed, but if this was the barter, the terms were unacceptable. Ah, what the hell is going on? Stand down. The other 3 SEALs snapped into action, moving with the synchronized precision of men trained to react to any threat. They formed a protective semicircle around me, weapons raised toward the boy, and, alarmingly, toward Rex. "Stand down, Rex. Report!" shouted Marcus, the second in command. Rex didn't move a muscle, but the boy smiled again, a broader, more unsettling expression this time. It was the smile of a child who has just successfully swapped a very large, very valuable toy for a slightly smaller, much more interesting one. "He doesn't hear you, Robert," the boy said patiently, his voice carrying a new edge of finality. "You received the full value of the contract, full health, decades potentially added to your lifespan. You demanded a miracle. Miracles require transference. Albright?" And the doctor who had just witnessed his entire understanding of human biology crumble was whimpering softly near the console. I tried to move my chair, to get between Rex and the boy, but the surge of adrenaline was fading, replaced by the overwhelming reality of my renewed vitality. I was powerful again, physically capable, but utterly blindsided by the metaphysical transaction. "You can't just take him," I roared, scrambling out of the chair and landing on steady legs. The shock of being on my feet was almost as profound as the cancer's departure. I stalked toward the boy, my fear manifesting as pure, familiar rage. "He's my employee. I pay him." The boy merely looked past me at Rex. "You feel it now, don't you, Captain?" Rex's head tilted, mimicking the boy's earlier gesture. Slowly, with terrifying deliberation, Rex lowered his rifle until the barrel rested on the marble floor. Then he dropped it entirely. The sound of high-grade metal clattering on polished stone echoed in the shocked silence. He turned his blank, luminous eyes toward the boy. "Yes," Rex whispered, his voice profoundly different, deeper, resonant, carrying a terrible authority that was certainly not the voice of a highly trained security contractor. "The anchor is secure. Shall we depart, young master?" The boy, the true entity wearing the boy's skin, nodded at Rex, finally acknowledging the powerhouse standing beside him. He gave me one last, swift, professional look, as if sizing up a successful client. "Your health is guaranteed, Robert Sterling," the boy confirmed. "But understand this, the cost of life is always paid in kind. You wanted to keep living your empire. Rex was the foundation that kept the walls standing. Now he is the foundation that carries the payment away." He took Rex's massive hand in his own small one. The contrast was grotesque, the ancient knowing eyes in the child's face and the immense terrifying loyalty in the soldier's vacant stare. "Do not seek us out, Robert," the boy advised, his voice already seeming to diminish, pulling away, as if the very air in the room was resisting his presence. It would only force another, far steeper ledger entry. And then they were gone. Not with a flash, not with a sound effect, but with the same eerie, silent transition that had marked the boy's arrival. One moment, the child and the towering soldier were standing there. The next, the space they occupied was empty. The marble floor undisturbed. The fallen rifle, the only testament that they had ever been present. I stood there, breathing deeply, perfectly healthy, the $5 million already wired as per my panicked instructions to Albright, and the silence of the penthouse was deafening. Albright was weeping uncontrollably against the computer console. Marcus and the remaining SEALs were staring at the empty doorway, weapons still halfway raised, their entire worldview shattered. I walked over to the spot where Rex had dropped his rifle. I picked it up. It was heavy, cold, and utterly familiar in my hand. I looked at my reflection in the dark muzzle. A man resurrected, staring back at a man sacrificed. I had cheated death, but I had done it by trading my shield for my future. The empire I was so desperate to save now stood exposed, Aki protected only by 3 traumatized subordinates, and the ghost of the protector who now belonged to forces I couldn't even begin to quantify. I could live another 30 years, perhaps 50, but the chilling realization settled into my resurrected bones. The great Robert Sterling had just paid the ultimate price for his second chance, and he would spend every remaining moment of it looking over his shoulder, waiting for the collection agency to return for the rest of the debt.